Welcome back. In the previous steps, we were focusing on routing. In this step, let's start creating the to-do component. We would want to create a to-do component and display a list of to-dos in there. What I'll start with is creating a list to-dos component. So above the welcome component, I'll say this is list to-dos component. List to-dos component extends component, and let's just start with the basic stuff, right? So let's just say list to-dos. How do I assign a URL to this? I would need to go to the router, and after the welcome component, I'll put this in, and this is list to-dos component, and the URL I'll assign to this is /to-dos. So when you go to /to-dos, you'd see the list to-dos component. Does this work? Localhost 3000 /to-dos. Cool. I'm able to see the list to-dos component. Now, what do we want to be able to do in the to-dos component is to show the to-do information. What I'll do to start with is I'll hard code the to-do information. So we'll put some to-do into the state and use that information to display the to-do. So what I'll do is start with the constructor, as usual, constructor of props. We'll start with super of props. That's kind of the basic thing that we do always. And then we can have this dot state is equal to, and we'll start with creating a simple to-do object. So the simple to-do object that we'll create is ID is, let's say, 1, comma, description, I'll say is learn React. So this is a simple object that I'm creating in here and putting it into state. Now I can use that and create the view for the to-do, right? So I can say list to-dos. I'll say h1 is list to-dos, and over here, let's format it better. So let's put it in parentheses so that we can actually format it in a better way. Okay, cool. So div, and we have the h1, and over here I want to put the to-do content, right? So the to-do content, let's say we would want to put it in a table. Let's say I'll start with a simple table. We'll have a header row, and inside this we would have a tr with the headers, and I'll have a ID. Actually, inside the trs in the head you'd have th /th, and let's say this is ID, and I'll have a description. So we basically have the table header right now, and let's quickly create the t body, and inside the t body we have a tr, and over here we'll have TDs, right? So this is basically a simple table structure, nothing complex about it. So th ID description, and in the TD, what do we need to include is the values of the to-dos. How can I get the values of the to-dos? They are in this state, right? So all that I need to do is this dot state dot to-do dot ID, and this dot state dot to-do dot, what do we have? We said it's description, right? So let's see what would happen with our page. Oops, it says h1 is not defined. Why is it not defined? I cannot use capital H1. We are in React JSX, so h1 is an element, so it's all small. It's not a custom component. Let's see. Enough. List to-dos, ID description, 1 and React. That's cool. So we have the basic to-do thing. We are able to now display one to-do. Now, how do we display a list of to-dos? We don't really want to do this once. Actually, we want to do it for a list of to-dos. How can we do that? Let's add a list of to-dos right now. So into the state, instead of having one to-do, what we need to do is have an array of to-dos. So how do we do that? So I'll say to-dos, and let's create a list, and right now we have to-dos as a list. You can have multiple to-dos. Let's say your to-dos are learn to dance, become an expert at React, and visit my home country, visit India. Oops, let me get this right. Visit India. One of the important things is to have different IDs, right? So 1, 2, 3. Now, what I would want to be able to do is to loop around the values and display them in here. How can I do that? Right? What I'll do is I'll copy this, and go to the browser console. I mean, there's a compiler error, that's sure. Let's not worry about it right now because this .state.todo does not exist, right? We changed it to to-dos. That's not a problem. We'll fix it. I'll do a right click, inspect, go to the console, and over here in the console, I'll create a simple variable called list. I'll say where to-dos is equal to and paste in whatever we have copied. So I'm creating this list of to-dos in here. So where to-dos is equal to this thing. So to-dos now is a list. JavaScript, you can do a for each around this, and you can define what to do with each to-do. So for each to-do, what I would want to do is I would want to do a console log. How do we do that? The way you can do that is by defining a arrow function in here. So I'm saying take each element, or actually take each to do, and what you need to do is console.log to do.description. So be careful with the syntax. So to-dos.for each is caps, and within parenthesis I'm defining this function. So this arrow function to do, take each to do and do a console.log to do.description. What would happen? It is printing the description of all these three. What we would need to do in React whenever you would want to loop around the list and display them is something similar to this. What we'll do is use something called a map function, where you can actually map each of these to-dos to something else. So I can say map to-dos.map. So for each to-do, map it to something else. So I can say take each to-do and map it to just the description of the to-do. So what would happen is this would print a array with only the descriptions. I can take the to-dos and map it to only IDs, to-do.id. What would happen? It prints only the IDs. So what we are doing is taking each of the individual elements and mapping it to something else. Or you can map it to something like this, a combination of this as well. So what we'll do now is something similar to what we are doing here with the map function. If you look at this piece of code, this tr should repeat for every to do. So whatever code that we have in here, actually what we would need to do is we would need to actually repeat this for all the to do. So first thing I would do is I'm putting curly braces around this piece of thing to indicate that this should repeat. Within the curly braces, what we'll do is we would do the map. So what we need to do is this dot state dot to dos dot map, take each to do. So what we would need to do is take each of the to dos. So each to do, and what should be returned for each of these to dos is this. I'll tab this. So for each of the to dos, what we need to do is not this dot state, the to do variable is declared in here. So that's which needs to be picked up, and return this specific element back. So what happens is it will loop over to dos and it will generate this code for each of the to dos which is present in here. So you can actually tab it out even further to make it very much more clearer. Let's see what would happen now. Now you can see that the list to dos component displays both the ID and the description in a table. So you have the IDs and the descriptions shown in the. So all that we had to do was to actually do a to-dos.map and define an arrow function. The arrow function represents how each of these elements should be shown. So we define it for one to do, and this is done for all the to dos. In this step, we took the first pass at the to dos component. There is still work left to be done. We'll look at that in the subsequent steps.